Good afternoon, reading room. We are here on day 228. Our little duck in our sunflower pad. Our lovely, beautiful roses over here, newly purchased from Walmart. Look at that, two packages. So I got some contrast with those beautiful pink roses in there. Aren't they beautiful? And then I got the baby's breath with it and a big leaf behind it. So we have set up the stage for our last chapter and epilogue in the book we are reading, A Dangerous Idea by Debbie Levy. The Scopes Trial, the original fight over science in schools. So sad to finish a book. Excited to start a new book. I've decided I'm going to read A Different Mirror for young people. A history of multicultural America by Ronald Takaki. I've read almost all of it. And I don't usually do that. As you know, I read some of the scopes and then I was like, yeah, no, we need to read this online. And the same thing with A Different Mirror. I can't stress enough how much I learned from that book. And most of it I put the ideas and concepts I put into both my classes, my early birds on equality, and my book lists became the philosophical classroom because of what I learned starting with the tenements there. So here we are on chapter 24. No, why do I keep putting that back in the wrong place? Chapter 25, The Evolution of Everything. Just let me look at this for a quick second. And then the epilogue. Yeah, all right. Just making sure I'm in the right place. During the 40 years between John's carnival of a trial and Susan's journey to the Supreme Court of the United States, much had evolved. This is the evolution of everything. I said that. Science evolved. The nation and its politics evolved. They are all evolving still. First, law. At the state and local level, the outcome of John's trial emboldened legislators and other officials to continue the fight against evolution in schools. Between 1925 and 1930, 15 state legislatures considered anti-evolution bills, while only 2 states, Arkansas and Mississippi, passed the proposals into law. I have chocolate on my finger. Oh, come on. There we go. Anti-evolutionists had other more effective ways by which they furthered their cause. In many places, they didn't need laws on the books because local school boards simply went ahead and nixed evolutionary teaching. State textbook authorities rejected school science books that included sections on evolution. As these anti-evolution politics took hold, mostly in the South, a funny thing happened to high school science books. They evolved too. Everywhere, not only in the South, publishers wanted to sell biology textbooks, not deal with controversy. So starting after John's trial, most publishers changed their books by deleting chapters on evolution and Darwin. Without discussions of evolution and biology, textbooks discussions of evolution in biology classes disappeared. By 1940, most high school science classes across the country, not just in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee, had evolved into evolution-free zones, but not science-free zones. And that science still led to the same kinds of thinking that they were looking for, which is to look at the world in these very objective ways instead of these subjective ways that are inspirational, by the way. At the same time, who was inspirational? William Jennings Bryan was inspirational. Clarence Darrow, not so much, except to inspire something different, it seems. At the same time, American constitutional law was evolving. The First Amendment to the United States says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. As Thomas Jefferson wrote back in 1802, these clauses put up a wall between church and state. They stand for the principle of separation of church and state. It's not a wild argument to say that a law that bans the teaching of evolution because it contradicts fundamentalist Christian thinking is a law that supports and establishes religion in violation of the First Amendment's so-called Establishment Clause. And yet, in all their hours of argument, John Scopes' lawyers didn't forcefully press this challenge. They mostly focused on various provisions of the Tennessee Constitution. The ACLU and John himself fixed on academic freedom of thought. The reason for this omission was simple. At the time, the First Amendment applied to Congress, not to the states. Congress shall make no law establishing religion. The legislature of Tennessee could, but the law is always evolving. And in 1947, the Supreme Court ruled in a case having nothing to do with evolution that the First Amendment's Establishment Clause does in fact apply to the states as well as the national government. In 1962 and 1963, the Supreme Court applied its interpretation to classrooms, ruling that the First Amendment did not allow public schools to sponsor or lead prayer or Bible readings with their students. For John Scopes, the change came too late to be of use in his case. For Susan Epperson, it made all the difference. The Supreme Court found that the Arkansas anti-evolution law violated the Establishment Clause, but it took 2 whole decades for Susan's case to arise after the Supreme Court opened up the possibility of challenging anti-evolution laws on First Amendment grounds. Where was a Scopes or Epperson during these 20 years? Answer: wherever they were, they probably were not teaching evolution in their classroom. Without evolutionary textbooks, prosecutors had no one to prosecute, and school authorities had hardly anyone to discipline for violating rules against teaching the prohibited science. So the debate lay dormant. But that's not necessarily true, because again, when you take a look at, it's not evolution with the monkey, right, which I don't think is really appropriate. I don't think that's appropriate anyway. There's not a science behind that. Show the science. That's a theory. It's evolutionary theory, and theories need to be supported by a lot of observable evidence, and there just isn't in the theory. So, to say it's banned from the books can be a little ridiculous based on the fact that it is only a theory, and it is a theory with very little observable evidence behind it. Don't forget. I keep seeing the 13 viruses up there. I know what happened in those 13 monkeys. I know what ended up happening. I mean, and those kinds of subtle messages, they are threatening. They are threatening. And they've been using these kinds of subtle messages to threaten and hold their position for a very, very long time. Scientists also learned to calculate the age of the Earth more accurately. Darwin's theory of descent with modification of random mutations gradually leading to new species only made sense if the Earth was very, very old, 6,000 years old, a blink of an eye in evolutionary time. 100 million, still not enough time for the type of gradual evolution Darwin proposed. By the 1930s, however, geologists determined that the Earth is billions of years old, plenty of time for the diversity of its life forms to have developed by descent with modification. Oh, really? Using your science? I forgot to read a paragraph here. Science, though, was not dormant. In Darwin's day, the fossil record of humans' ancestors was practically non-existent. By the time of the Scopes trial, the record had filled out. Miraculously, they don't have that in the literature, but still was sparse. In the years following the trial, paleontologists found hundreds of fossils of human ancestors and cousins dating back to 6 or 7 million years, so they say. Scientists discovered fossils of our most direct ancestors in Africa dating from hundreds of thousands of years ago. They learned how to analyze the genetic material. They devised a way to analyze the genetic material of living people and extinct human ancestors to understand their relationship. No wonder they don't mind extinction. And about that super slow Darwinian evolution, as the 20th century progressed, so did scientists' understanding of the mechanics of evolution. Yes, still to Darwin's random mutation and natural selection of the organisms that inherit beneficial mutations. But scientists unearthed information about other ways evolution occurs. In some cases, researchers found that it happened much more quickly than Darwin assumed. Change occurs not only when genes mutate, but also when they recombine as part of their reproductive process. In other words, sex is part of the engine of evolution. That's what you discovered, but you didn't change anything. You're just reading, the Braille. Evolution is also pushed along by other important processes. There's gene flow, which refers to the migration of genetic material, such as in prehistoric humans, from one population to another. There's genetic drift, which is about the totally random survival of individuals, not because they contain a mutation that better adapts them to survival than others, but just because they are lucky. You mean like the Jews? The ridiculousness of that statement. I'm sorry, the ridiculousness of that statement. It's just luck. Look at the stats. Look at the stats in the data. Because I know statistically we're off the charts. I know it. And that's why people believe. They use your science and you stand there dumbfounded while you're engineering your own FDA science. Fucking dumbass science. Like a bug that doesn't get squashed under a person's foot and lives on to populate the world. Not everything in the science of evolution got resolved during the decades after John Scopes' trial, far from it. Not everything is resolved today, even as newer scientific tools, such as genetic sequencing, provide powerful evidence of evolution by revealing striking similarities in the genomes of different species. Yes, but where does it count? You need to weight those, right? Are we thinking the same? You need to weight the physical traits compared to the mental traits. And by the way, you don't use science to study any of it, so you can't tell us what those mental traits really are. For example, for a dog. Not everything in the science of evolution got resolved during the decades after John Scopes' trial. Oops. Scientists still debate the mechanisms of evolution, but evolution itself is widely settled. Facts do not go away when scientists debate rival theories to explain them, or explain them after the fact with science that's dating science. You're dating science. Where's your fossil record? Let's see it. Let's examine the fossil record. I've seen examinations of it. They don't support your theory. But, I don't know, you probably made that fossil record up and thought it supported the theory because you were, drunk at the time. Stephen Jay Gould, one of the most famous paleontologists and evolutionary biologists of the 20th century, wrote Stephen Jay Gould. So, facts do not go away when scientists debate rival theories to explain them. Wrote Stephen Jay Gould, not on either side, by the way. Not on evolutionary side, the facts don't go away, right? Just because you called it 6 million years. Oh, you're measuring? Gee, thanks. Because you don't seem to know how to grow plants without wrapping them in poison. But apples did not, here we go. Stephen Jay Gould, an evolutionary biologist of the 20th century who wrote The Mismeasure of Man and a wonderful scientific theory book that shows you how they supported their evolutionary theory with real facts. Stephen Jay Gould, Mismeasure of Man. Einstein's theory of gravitation replaced Newton's, but apples did not suspend themselves in mid-air pending the outcome. Once again, thanks for telling me that water's a gas. All these changes in the law and textbooks and scientific theory might have been interesting only to lawyers and book publishers and scientists, but in 1957 another change came along that got Americans worried. This time they were worried about whether their kids were being well educated in science. That year the Soviet Union became the first to send a satellite into space. The launch of Sputnik by America's main rival after World War II was a shock to the public. How could the Soviets have outperformed the United States in the technological race to space? Do you think maybe the Chinese are doing it right now because we've built a wall around ourselves and forgot the lesson that China learned when they did that? Beautiful wall. Our wall, ugly as hell. Their wall, gorgeous. Sputnik 1. How could the Soviets, what else would their superior scientific minds achieve, and at what cost to peace and prosperity? I don't know. Let United States be the example, and they'll show you the cost to peace and prosperity. 100 years without Darwinism are enough, implored Hermann Joseph Muller, a Nobel Prize-winning geneticist, in a much-quoted speech in 1959. It was the 100th anniversary of On the Origin of Species. By the early 1960s, evolution was back in biology books. That was what prompted Susan Epperson's case. The new textbook she was told to teach from included evolution. The old Arkansas law told her she couldn't teach evolution. She went to court, and the rest really is history. And even before the Supreme Court's decision in Susan's case in 1967, Tennessee repealed the Butler Act, the law under which John Scopes was prosecuted. So evolution was back in public schools in some places. Thankfully, it was shorn of the eugenics nonsense of Hunter's old acidic biology. The Supreme Court had said that states couldn't outlaw evolutionary teaching. If Clarence Darrow could come back from the dead, would he have declared victory? Probably not. The battle between evolutionists and anti-evolutionists was not over. Americans now cared about science. Creationists pivoted to science too. They published scientific journals and found colleges. They wrote law review articles. They built museums. Instead of the science of evolution, however, they put forward creation science, or scientific creationism, and said that it belonged in schools as part of science classes. Creation science was the same as creationism, but with evidence from the natural world presented in support of biblical stories such as divine creation and the Genesis flood. This new approach found some success. Creationists were no longer seeking to outlaw evolutionary teaching. Rather, they argued there should be balanced treatment in science classes of evolutionary science and creation science. Some states and school boards, North and South, were convinced it seemed only fair. No countered evolutionary scientists. This wasn't a matter of fair or unfair. Still, creation science found its way into the classroom. It was found It also found its way into national politics. Campaigning for the presidency in 1980, Ronald Reagan said that evolution is a scientific theory only, and in recent years, it has been challenged in the world of science and is not believed in the scientific community to be as infallible as it once was. In fact, evolution was challenged only in the creation science community. So what? It's still science. And the larger community didn't take interest in it. The creation science community did. Not in the larger scientific community, plus they wouldn't publish that kind of science. They didn't call it science, even though, again, as in the Bible code, it had a far harder scientific rigidity than the science they're talking about on measuring the Earth's age after the fact. The biblical story of creation, Reagan said, should be taught in schools as a counterpoint to evolution. Reagan was a Republican. Half a century after the death of the great commoner, it was now Republican Party politicians, not Democrats, who are more likely to embrace creationism. Reagan won the election and served 2 terms as president. He also got his wish. Equal time laws and policies took over. But in 1987, toward the end of President Reagan's second term, the Supreme Court shot them down. Creationists responded with another theory in support of creationism in schools: intelligent design. Intelligent design holds that life is so complex and amazing that it could not have merely evolved from simple to more complex life forms. And I went to the Discovery Institute, and I fully believe that science and what they have to do is address the science in those reports, not shoot up their fucking mouths like they're subjective scientists, right? Like that's okay for them because they're scientists, so they can be subjective. Oh, they were subjected to the hate law of evolutionary science. Prove your fucking point. Under this theory, the best explanation for life is that it has been put together intentionally by an intelligent designer and maker, and that would be, for most adherent of this idea, God. In 2005, a federal judge struck down a Pennsylvania school district's efforts to introduce 9th grade biology students to intelligent design as an alternative to Darwinian evolution. Judge E. Jones III, who has no business getting his stupid face in that. If people want to have a debate, let them have a fucking debate. Get your politics out of there because you just want to be famous for something and be put in the history books. Judge O. John. Are you another John? Just another John? Hoping that things stay the same? John. Explain his ruling was required by the First Amendment and by the U.S. Supreme Court decisions, including Susan Epperson's case. Judge Jones received so many death threats that the U.S. Marshal Service gave him and his family special protection. Guess I don't get the special protection. I probably do have it now. The diseased people are, a few doors down, although one was right there. Judge Jones received so many death threats that the U.S. Marshal... Blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, the school board members who had voted for the intelligent design policy were booted out of the office by voters. And not only that, I had a whole hail of bullets at me in Mexico, at my sons, and, I'm thinking of 13 Monkeys. I know how that story went. And I also, I've said it before. On the other hand, the school board members who had voted for the intelligent design policy were booted out of office by voters. Sounds like they stacked the voting. The Pennsylvania ruling didn't apply to the entire country. A similar case in another court or the U.S. Supreme Court could lead to a different result. The anti-evolutionists have developed additional positions to convince school officials and judges to permit the teaching of creationism. There is the controversy argument. Science classes should, at the very least, instruct high school students in the debate between evolutionary scientists and creation scientists. They just want equal time is what they want. They want it to be equitable. You kicked us out of the science books for how long? You guys are kicked out of the science books for how long? That's equity to them. Not equality, just equity. Early birds. Evolutionary scientists counter that creation science isn't science. You can't say that, you asshole, unless you looked at the papers. You have to take research paper by research paper, and if that's not in the courts, you haven't defended then that statement that it's not science. Just calling it not science doesn't make it not science. I call your medicine not science, and I have evidence for that. While there may be a debate, it isn't a scientific one and doesn't belong in science curriculum. There is the religion of secularism argument. When the government elevates evolution over all other possible theories of life and promotes hostility to religion, it is establishing a type of religion, an atheistic, anti-Christian creed. This, the argument goes, violates the First Amendment Establishment Clause. Millions of people believe that the Bible offers the most important bulwark against societal and moral breakdown. Like William Jennings Bryan, they express concerns about the ethical life of young people. They worry about young people turning away from religion. If children are taught, they turn away from religion because religion is not our moral compass. They don't have a need to turn away from God or a higher power. If children are taught that they are descended from animals, these creationists fear the worst for civilization. See the footnote on what happened the day that Charles Darrow died. They see Darwinism, as Will did, as the source of man's inhumanity to man. But evolution doesn't want people, and rightfully should, because that perspective is that there is in nature an evilness or a disregard for life. And that came not from, for example, natives, right? Native Americans, indigenous people. That idea didn't come from indigenous people. But evolutionists don't want people to be religious or irreligious, to be cruel or kind. The theory of evolution describes, it doesn't prescribe. It has no shoulds. It doesn't say that people should struggle against one another to survive. No, but it does say that you should be able to dig up burial sites based on the fact that you promote progress. And that is I'll call it anti-God. That's anti-God. It just rips at humanity, that kind of indecency to spirituality. It's indecent. It doesn't say the strong should vanquish the weak. Evolution, descent with modification just is. And many deeply religious people today fully embrace evolution, as did the faith leaders and biblical scholars who backed John Scopes in his stand against the Butler Act in 1925. No, they don't fully embrace evolution. They see that they can be compatible. Religion and God can be compatible with evolution. Just like William Jennings Bryan said, but apparently you weren't paying attention. Thought leaders like Dr. Francis Collins, who used to head the National Institute of Health and the Human Genome Project, which was a complete failure and a complete waste. I was just thinking of it this morning. What a complete waste of medical money. You didn't solve one disease. You didn't cure one disease with that genome project. Here, a toilet flush, as all those billions of dollars go down into the sewer. Have made it their mission to show that religion, belief, and the theory of evolution are not in conflict. They were two ways of knowing, but knowing different things and asking different questions, which is true. I read part of Dr. Collins' book, but I can't remember. It's The Evolution of the Gene, something like that. And it was, real hard to read. Dr. Collins, and it was also had a lot of inconsistencies, right? So he'd say one thing and then he'd say exactly the opposite, not 2 pages later. Science asking how, faith answering why. Dr. Collins said in 2019, science asking how, faith answering why. Charles Darwin asked how the natural world came to be as he and we have found it. He came up with powerful answers that have convinced legions of ordinary people and brilliant thinkers alike, maybe they're alcoholics, I don't know, and have stood the test of time, modern evidence, and research. He didn't pretend to answer why human beings are here on Earth or why life exists at all. He left that to each person alone or in community with others, believing or not believing in a supreme being. Okay, so here we've got the monkey here. This is why I believe in intelligent design. There's no way I'm related to that. A cartoon poking fun at the creationist idea of intelligent design as an explanation of life on Earth. Oh my gosh, I'm so for that one, right? That monkey is saying that, by the way. There's no way I would be anything like this guy. Right on, monkey. Do you honestly believe we evolved from a single snowflake? An evolution joke that doesn't take sides. Right here. So those are cute and funny, for sure. And then here, creation, the true story. And so we've got, on the first day, God created nothing because there was plenty of time. Second day, same deal. Why rush? On the third day, he created a list. On the fourth day, he was not in the right mind. On the fifth day, all this stuff was going on. You don't want to know. On the sixth day, God created the whole shebang. On the seventh day, he rested. A creation joke that doesn't take sides. Doesn't take sides? Really? Epilogue. Legislators pass laws, school officials adopt policies, courts issue rulings, but neither laws nor policies nor rulings show up in school every day and stand in front of the biology class. The 100,000 public schools in the United States don't all follow the same playbook. A large percentage of the American public rejects the theory of evolution and may not understand it. And what goes on in any given science classroom depends on the particular community in which it's situated, on teachers, principals, students, parents, and politicians. So whether your biology textbook includes a sticker disclaiming evolution as only a theory depends on where you live. Whether science teachers promote creationism may depend on the attitudes in their communities. Whether teachers dive deep into Darwinism or avoid the subject may depend on whether they think such instruction will bring them grief from parents or school board members or a governor. And parents and politicians will not hesitate to heap grief on teachers. See Exhibit A. They will agitate over what they view as unwholesome subjects in school. It's been going on for more than 100 years. History books that were insufficiently patriotic or too negative about the South in the Civil War or too negative about slavery, classes in sex education, all provoked heated controversies. And when? Before 1930, the journalist Nellie Kenyon, writing a couple of weeks in advance of the Scopes trial in 1925, tried to give her readers a map of the landscape. Freedom of teaching, she wrote, has been more interfered with by law in the past 6 months than at any time in the American history. There were laws requiring Bible readings, laws forbidding hiring teachers who were radical, laws disqualifying teachers who were pacifist, and laws prohibiting teaching that ours is an inferior form of government, not to mention the anti-evolution law. Today, yeah, that's what I'm talking about in our philosophical classroom. I'm going to go to imperialism. Before we get into Japan as an analogy for imperialism so our heads don't blow up when we're talking about the United States. Ooh, look at this. Today, complaints about science in the classroom go well beyond evolution. Some parents and lawmakers don't want schools to teach about climate change. They don't want laws and policies to address climate change, either because they think it's a hoax or not caused by human activity. This is contrary to scientific evidence. Climate change deniers found a friend in the White House in President Donald Trump. I don't believe it, he said in 2018. One of the problems that a lot of people like myself, we have very high levels of intelligence, but we're not necessarily such believers in climate change. Sounds pretty intelligent to me. The COVID-19 pandemic starting in 2020 also spurred epidemic resistance to science among large swaths of American public and their leaders. The pandemic started in 2019. When leading scientists, the preeminent experts on infectious and viral diseases, tried to guide the public on how to protect themselves from the novel coronavirus, President Trump called them idiots because they were following scientists who have lied and given the media misinformation for years and then treated their knowledge as if they were God. And so here are two presidents' threads lifted from the pattern woven a century ago. First, ridicule anti-evolutionists at the time of the Scopes trial made fun of scientists because, as Will Bryan scoffed, they cannot agree with each other. Will's mockery was a cheap shot, just as it was a cheap shot a century later to mock scientists for altering their advice in response to new and evolving discoveries on how to protect against getting sick or dying from the coronavirus. Oh, really? Really? Because it sounds like they just amped up their poison. Is that the knowledge that they got? I think they need to be ridiculed. The way they handled the coronavirus, they absolutely need to be ridiculed. It's not medicine. And the people that ridiculed them for what they called medicine, they put into mental institutions for a checkup on their brain. That's what they did. It's by their definition, Nazism, communism, totalitarianism. That's what that is. I hate to use the word communism because that's an economic system of trade, by the way. And second, lumping together science and belief by couching science as something you believe in or not. Well, only because they don't know how to read the scientific literature because you wrote it in basically hieroglyphics. That's what happened to science as a result of ongoing observation, experimentation, and yes, disagreement among scientists. Knowledge evolves. And second, lumping together science and belief by couching science as something you believe in or not, forcing or even strongly urging people to believe in a creed, science, that doesn't appeal to them. It's not about appealing. It's about evidence. It's about leaving your subjective atheist beliefs that are unethical for a road to humanitarianism. That's what it's about. That's a bad thing to do. That's a bad thing to do, isn't it? It's un-American, isn't it? But science isn't a religious creed, and religion isn't science. What accounts for the persistence of resistance to science among Americans? It is because scientific theories aren't well understood. People come from monkeys. Is it because they make people uncomfortable? People come from monkeys? Is it because in the case of coronavirus or climate change, for example, they point to the need to change our behaviors? The same questions arise when confronting the persistence of resistance to historical facts. First of all, history does not present facts. It's a misnomer to say historical facts. Is it because history isn't understood? The Civil War was about the South preserving states' rights, not slavery. Is it because it makes people uncomfortable? Students shouldn't feel distress for the racism of people in the past. Is it because it points to the need for change, to change our thinking? As in the Scopes case, none of this is just about history. It isn't just about science. It's also culture. It's mostly culture. That is, these conflicts reflect divisions in attitude, values, and even life goals. Us versus those people, right-thinking folks versus morons. Sometimes the cultural rift, I kind of stand behind that one sometimes, don't I? Sometimes the cultural rift breaks along geographic lines, north, south, coastal, non-coastal. Sometimes it breaks along religious lines or political party lines. And much as people much as people say they crave peace, many also seem drawn to conflict. The louder the better. So the cultural divide gives rise to boisterous cheering sections and booing sections. People come to watch the show. The ridicule, misrepresentations, and heat are turned up. Accusations of conspiracy are flung about. Opinions are firm and final. Liberals, radicals, and conservatives are alike in this respect. The Boston Globe observed, few of them act upon Shakespeare's admonition, take heed lest by your heat you burn yourselves. The Globe editorialist was commenting in July 1925 on the just concluded trial in Dayton, Tennessee. But William Jennings Bryan wasn't the last leader to whip up his audience's feelings of being disrespected by pointy-headed elites. Clarence Darrow wasn't the last skeptic whose tolerance turned to shouted insults. H.L. Mencken wasn't the last journalist to smirk at people he didn't really understand and exaggerate their behaviors and beliefs as a means of gaining an audience. Look around and you'll know the beat goes on, and so does the heat. But also, Nellie Kenyon wasn't the last journalist to try to hew to facts and avoid sensationalism. John Thomas Scopes wasn't the last teacher to stand up for a principle without trashing those who thought otherwise. Sometimes I do some trash talking. Neither was Susan Epperson. Their beat goes on too. Yeah, that's why their beat goes on. Time to start criticizing the immoral people around us. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am saying that morality and our knowledge about morality, that's what is ingrained in us, and it has been shown generation after generation that it's ingrained in us, and we give that little dog look, huh? When it is violated until we learn to hide that shocked expression. Dr. Annette Feravich, we have finished another book in the reading room. I love this. I am so happy that we have turned back to reading. A Dangerous Idea, The Scopes Trial, The Original Fight Over Science in Schools by Debbie Levy. Thanks so much for joining me. Check out what I had to say about where this kind of Armageddon idea is going philosophically. Check out the Philosophical Classroom. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thanks so much for joining me. Oh, look at that. Crazy. All right. Thanks so much for joining me here on day 228 in the classroom, where we keep little minds and big minds healthy and in their minds, their bodies, and their hearts, and their souls, and their spirits. Thanks so much for joining me.